Would signing Jamal Adams be a brilliant move or a massive mistake for the Baltimore Ravens? We talk about that and so much more coming up on a bonus episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, as always, for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. So on video form, you get on YouTube, you can subscribe, follow along, turn notifications on over there. Or if you're an audio listener in audio form, you want to listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we have it covered wherever you prefer to listen to your podcast. 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage Monday through Friday. So if you're looking for a steady fix of Ravens content, we have you covered here on this show. Happy Sunday, everybody. It's we've done 2 bonus episodes now, including this one. We did one yesterday, another one today. I had promised to, or all but promised to. I didn't have enough time last week to talk about everything I wanted to talk about. So instead of just not talking about it at all or trying to condense it into a segment and not really giving enough justice, I wanted to make some bonus episodes about it. So we're going to be talking more about the Jamal Adams potential move. Obviously, he comes into Baltimore for a visit on Tuesday, and there was a lot of controversy surrounding the visit only. I mean, obviously nothing has happened yet, but some people really on board with the idea, other people not so much. So we're going to be talking about today if signing Jamal Adams would be a brilliant move for the Ravens or would it be a massive mistake. Plus, we're also going to get into a roster check-in in the final part of the show. Just kind of go over where the Ravens roster stands right now. We'll do a little bit of this over the next couple of weeks, but just wanted to do a preliminary one as we're just a couple weeks removed from the draft, almost a month now. I think it's just about a month now. Honestly, crazy how time flies. Feels like it was both yesterday and like 5 months ago. So we'll talk about just where the Ravens stand right now from a roster perspective. Let's talk about Jamal Adams here first and foremost. We'll talk about the positive side of this first, right? Would it be a brilliant move for the Ravens to bring in Jamal Adams? Now, I think when you first talk about Adams, and this is stuff we had talked about on the shows we did last week, you have to identify what his skill set is. And so we'll get to that a little bit more in the second part of the show, but his skill set would essentially be what you would want in replacing a Patrick Queen. And it's not so much about him playing too high or him going out there and being this ball hawk coverage player. Jamal Adams works best when he is at the line of scrimmage. He can play that dime backer role if need be. And he's able to just free flow move. And that's what made him so effective, both with the Jets and then during his early Seattle tenure too. But if Baltimore now is of the mindset of, all right, you know what? Patrick Queen is now gone. And it's not like they have to marry 2 inside linebackers on the field together. Roquan obviously is going to be on the field for almost every defensive snap. But the reason Patrick Queen was on the field so much with Roquan was because he earned that. And he was so good next to Roquan. They didn't necessarily have a need to take Patrick Queen off the field for a dime backer in a lot of situations. But now with Queen gone, you're looking at Trenton Simpson replacing him. Maybe Malik Harrison plays a role in that as well, just a tiny role. I don't know how big it would be. But to me, Jamal Adams, if you're thinking for Baltimore, oh yeah, we're going to start using a dime backer a little bit more if that's the mindset they're thinking of, I don't think Adams is a half bad move. Now, we'll talk about some of the negatives in the second part of the show, but it just feels like the Ravens are going to have a bunch of different defensive coverages this year. It's not the defense is not going to be completely different. Obviously, when you make the internal hire of Zach Orr after Mike McDonald leaves for Seattle, you're retaining a lot of that defense. But personnel's changed over a little bit with Patrick Queen being gone, Geno Stone being gone, some others as well. So it's not going to be a drastic shift, but we've seen the Ravens have success with dime linebacker types like a Chuck Clark. Plus, I think for Jamal Adams, he's been so, I don't want to say necessarily overutilized, but in a way, yes, overutilized over the course of his career, where he's not going to be asked to play massive snaps in that Baltimore defense. I'd essentially almost call it situational. So if Baltimore brings him in, you can probably keep him fresh, which is huge considering injuries have been such a big part of his last couple of seasons and honestly his career, and his probably cut short a lot of successful seasons or could be successful seasons. Again, I talked about how he's free-flowing, moves around the line of scrimmage, can blitz off the middle, blitz off the edge. The Ravens defense loves guys like that. Obviously, Mike McDonald loved it when he was here. Don Martindale used a lot of that as well. You can go back further if you want to. I'm sure Zach Orr is going to use a lot of those personnel packages as well. And the Ravens have guys already that can do that. Obviously, Arthur Millette was a big player who did that last season. Kyle Hamilton can move all around the defense as well. And Colts game, 3 sacks in the first half, blitzing off the edge. The Colts just could not. They spammed that action over and over and over again, and the Colts had no answer. But Adams does give you it's almost like a Kyle Hamilton insurance policy in a way, while also being some level of a Patrick Queen replacement, which is kind of an interesting proposition because of what I talked about a couple minutes ago with Chuck Clark and the success that they had with him in that role. So if they want to move back to that a little bit, I don't think Adams would be the worst thing in the world. Plus, if there's a place that I feel like his career could be quote unquote revived, I feel like that probably is Baltimore. They've had a reputation for that. There were a lot of questions about what Jadeveon Clowney could do last year, what Kyle Van Noy could do, Arthur Millette, is he washed? There were a lot of veterans they brought in, Odell as well, where I know for him it was a little different with his on-field production, etc. But there were a bunch of questions about guys. And for Odell, it was definitely about leadership as well. Even Clowney had some of those questions, and I was kind of curious about that. But almost every single veteran that came in had at least some level of an impact both on and off the field. And so for Jamal Adams, somebody who is definitely on the downswing, or at least he appears to be on the downswing in his career, if he sees an opportunity to have some level of a role, again, if he's okay with not being the main focus and the main part of a defense, but you can still utilize 3 safety looks with him, or, if you want to classify it as a linebacker, he's essentially a safety linebacker hybrid, but he's going to be listed as a safety, and that's fine. But at the same time, he's also not going to cost a lot of money. And that's another big thing here. So if Baltimore's able to get, it doesn't even have to be prime Jets Jamal Adams. It doesn't have to be that player. But if you can get somewhere close to like even good or great Jamal Adams in a lesser role, a fresher Jamal Adams in that specific role, you don't want to overextend with him and use him in a role. Don't put him in single high. Don't do any of that crazy stuff. I don't think the Ravens would do that. But it would be playing to his skill set. But I think it would be a better move if they do make it. Again, we don't know what's going to happen here. Again, at the time of this recording, nothing has happened. It's purely just talking about the hypothetical of the move. To me, I think it would be a brilliant move if they also brought in somebody to replace Geno Stone. Jamal Adams is not a Geno Stone replacement. The Ravens need Geno Stone's skill set more than they need Patrick Queen's skill set on this defense right now. Plus, you can even look at how, for Baltimore, you look at the injury histories, right? As I've said multiple times on this show over the past 5 days, Marcus Williams had 5 great healthy years in New Orleans, comes to Baltimore, has 2 pretty significant injuries. Kyle Hamilton, on the other hand, has been, knock on wood, decently healthy, right? Had the MCL thing late in the season last year. But if Marcus Williams goes down and you only have Jamal Adams as your only proven safety depth, I mean, that it's not the right skill set. And you can't play him in that role. You're going to have to rely on a young guy. It does make me feel good that Baltimore is at least sniffing around safety depth. I think that is the biggest remaining need on their roster, which we'll get a little bit more into in the final part of the show. But if you can bring in another guy, Justin Simmons, Eddie Jackson, Micah Hyde, whatever it's going to be, that would make the signing, if they make it, much more of a brilliant move, because then your safety room is Kyle Hamilton, Marcus Williams, Jamal Adams, and whoever that Geno Stone replacement would be. That's that's probably one of the top safety rooms, if not the top safety room in the league. So the Ravens need experience. Obviously, you want to develop your young guys as well, but in a position that's so vital. Plus, I think that for Kyle Hamilton, which we'll talk about a little bit as well, having that insurance policy is not a bad thing, right? You can say it's a Patrick Queen replacement and that would be it, but having a Kyle Hamilton insurance policy, definitely not the worst thing in the world for the Baltimore defense. So I get there are issues with Jamal Adams. I get he's not the perfect player. He's also had some run-ins, which we'll get to coming up in the second part of the show. But there are aspects of this move that probably would fit Baltimore's defense. Feels kind of like a Baltimore Ravens signing. Again, taking a flyer on a vet who is seemingly on the downswing of his career. Could he have a resurgent year and kind of revamp his career with the Ravens? We've seen many veterans do it in the past. I feel like Jamal Adams could also be one of those guys, but it would have to be in a specific role, right? You can't just throw him in and have him do everything and anything on the defense. I'd probably want it, and the Ravens might probably want it as well, to be something where you can keep him fresh, play him in specific packages, and that would be fine, because I think Adams is still a good player, but he has to stay healthy, and there are other aspects to his game that need improving. So coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk about if the move could be a massive mistake for Baltimore. Stay tuned, plenty to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 120 million parts, so number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Visit eBay Motors, your burden of rubber, not cash. Although pricing needed the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Otherwise, only exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. We're back, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher still talking with you here on this Sunday, a bonus edition episode of Locked On Ravens. Usually don't do these things on Saturdays and Sundays throughout the offseason, and usually regularly too. We're Monday through Friday show, but again, there was some content I didn't get out last week or over the course of the last couple of days, just because there's so much going on. The NFL offseason, it is never really the offseason, as our guest Kaji Ismail tells us all the time. And it's true. There's always something going on. So instead of just trying to, again, condense all that content, wanted to make some bonus episodes on that. So thank you for making us a part of your day here on the weekend. We'll be back, of course, regularly scheduled programming tomorrow. So that'll be exciting as we dive into another week of Ravens football. Let's talk about Jamal Adams a little bit from, I guess, the other perspective. We talked about potentially how it'd be a brilliant move for Baltimore, but are there other elements that would make it a potentially massive mistake for the Ravens to make? And I think there are. And part of the thing I talked about at the end of that first segment is the skill set factor, where to me, if Marcus Williams goes down and it's Jamal Adams, you cannot play him in that role, right? You can't play him in the Marcus Williams role. As I talked about too, if you bring Jamal Adams in with somebody with that Geno Stone skill set, then I think it's a fine move, 1,000%. But if you only bring in Jamal Adams, I just think there's another skill set that Baltimore should be prioritizing at first. Not saying that they should never bring him in, but to me, your safety depth right now is Sanusi Kane, who was your 7th-round pick out of Purdue, and then Bo Braid, who's an undrafted free agent out of Maryland. Both those guys have potential, but to trust them every year in the Lamar Jackson prime is Super Bowl or bust. Robert Griffin III said this, and I wholeheartedly agree with him, and I've been saying that on this show for a while now. You cannot, quote-unquote, waste years of Lamar Jackson's prime. They did it last year, right? Everybody thought that was the year. Everybody thought the roster was perfect and the coaching staff was perfect and everything lined up, and I certainly thought it too. But the Ravens couldn't take advantage, and that was disappointing. And we talked about how the season was a failure because of it, essentially. Now, there were plenty of great things in that season. It's a whole nother conversation, but the end goal, based off what the end goal was with how good that team was, it was a failure. Now, Hamilton is a huge part of the Ravens defense, right? We've talked about Kai Hamilton a ton over the course of this show and just, on the show in general. He is at his best when he can move around the field, when he can be free, play up at the line, play off the edge. He can play in coverage. He can go roam in the slot. He does so much for this defense. But to me, Jamal Adams wouldn't give Kyle Hamilton that freedom. I think a player like Geno Stone would. And we saw how Geno Stone did that for Baltimore last season when Marcus Williams was both injured and out of the lineup, and when Marcus Williams came back in those 3 safety looks and 3 safety sets. You want a player that can effectively be able to have Baltimore utilize Kyle Hamilton in the right ways. And I've made this example multiple times here because it's true. It happened with the Ravens division rival last year and the Pittsburgh Steelers, who could not use their star safety, Minkah Fitzpatrick, in that role because they didn't have the depth. And so he was relegated to a specific role that he was still fine at, but he wasn't able to go and roam and do his thing, and it severely hindered what Pittsburgh was able to do on the defensive side of the ball. Now Pittsburgh has safety depth. They signed former Raven Deshaun Elliott. They have a bunch more players now, and Minka Fitzpatrick will be able to return to that do-it-all safety role. For Kyle Hamilton, the thing that it's one of the worst things that can happen to the defense, one of the most catastrophic things, is you relegate Kyle Hamilton to one specific role, and you take away his versatility. You take away that chess piece ability. To me, Jamal Adams, if he's not brought in with anybody else, that would essentially take away. I mean, even right now, you're essentially taking that away. That's why I think it's so imperative for Baltimore to get a Geno Stone replacement, and that's why Geno Stone was so important to Baltimore's defense. At least the Geno Stone role is so important to Baltimore's defense, where you have a guy that can be a ball hawk. You can play him in single high if you need to. Obviously, two safety, too high. But for Kyle Hamilton, if you use both Marcus Williams and Geno Stone in those roles, you can move Kyle Hamilton up. You can put him at the line. With Sanusi Kane and Bo Braid, I mean, you're not trusting either of those guys right now. You can't, right? I mean, there are opportunities. I'm sure there will be a couple throughout the season. But as I just said with Lamar Jackson, every year is Super Bowl or bust in his prime. You have to maximize on it. We know this team is good enough to do it, but can they actually get over that hump? What would help them get over that hump is depth at a lot of different positions, right? They're going to need a lot of young players to step up, but it's safety. It's playing it a bit too risky, in my opinion. Obviously, the argument for Rashad Bateman is there. The argument for Trenton Simpson is there. The argument for David Ojabo is there, et cetera, right? Ben Cleveland and Andrew Voorhees and all those guys, even Roger Rosengarten. But the argument to me is not there for a 7th-round pick and an undrafted guy to be your only safety depth. Plus, the argument is not there for me to essentially neglect that Geno Stone role and devoid yourself of having that skill set on the roster, considering how injured Marcus Williams has been over these last 2 seasons. So again, that really, it's not specifically, that part of it is not specifically at Jamal Adams. It's more of a skill set thing. But then you have to think about some of the other metrics Jamal Adams has ranked in over the past couple of seasons. He has not been a good tackler. He has no sacks over the last 3 seasons. His injury history has been spotty at best, and we've seen concussions. We've seen lower leg injuries, lower body injuries. He also has had some run-ins with the media, right? Calling a New York reporter's wife out and, saying yikes to New York reporter's wife. I mean, those are all things. That's why I was a little shocked the Ravens went down this road in the first place. But maybe it's a situation like I talked about earlier on the show this week with Dez Bryant, for example. Back in 2021, they bring him in, don't sign him right away. Apparently the workout was terrible for Dez, by the way. But they said, we're going to keep you on the short list. If we need you, we'll call you. And that's what they did. The wide receiver position was not working out. They called Dez, and that's how it was. So maybe that's what it is, where it's just an insurance move, but they're looking at other options as well. I would be genuinely floored if the Ravens did not bring in at least one veteran safety. I think it would be malpractice if the Ravens don't bring in a veteran safety here, because it's nothing against Sanusi Kane. It's nothing against Bo Braid and any of these guys. You can maybe put Ardarius Washington back there if you want to, and I'm a big Ardarius Washington guy, but feels like the Ravens really see him as a slot. You have to have at least one veteran safety as depth. We know Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams are one of the best, if not the best, safety tandems in the league. There's no questioning that. There's no doubt about it. Jamal Adams in a specific role will be fine, but Jamal Adams being your line of defense, especially when it comes to moving around Kyle Hamilton, that to me, it's something that I would probably go in a different direction. But if they make the move, they have to have a specific role in mind for him to feel confident enough in his other abilities. They can, 1, make Kyle Hamilton be the chess piece of this defense again, and 2, have him play that specific role. So there are arguments for the move. There are arguments against it. I mean, it's a very slippery slope, and I know there are a lot of different viewpoints on it, but it'd be interesting. I mean, he definitely wouldn't cost a ton, but at the same time, the Ravens only have about $6-ish million in cap space right now. So if that's what they decide to roll with, they have to be sure. They have to be 100% sure. Coming up, though, we're going to be talking about a roster check-in. We'll go position by position quickly, talking about where each position stands as we are rounding out the month of May. Stay tuned. We got a lot to get to on the show. First, the show is brought to you by Yahoo Finance, and the show is sponsored by Yahoo Finance. So I've been using Yahoo Finance, our sponsor today. And for me, I've always thought to myself, it would be great if I could see all my investments and retirement accounts in one place. Now, there's always something over here, something over there, something over there. It's all so jumbled. But with Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access expert analysis that you need to tend your entire portfolio with confidence. So for me, talking about 401ks and all of those investment accounts, I've been using Yahoo Finance to consolidate them in one place, and that's made life so incredibly easy for me, and it's been so easy to manage them. And to me, it's been so huge to be able to grow my portfolio. It's been something I've wanted to do for a long time. Plus, with the rising cost of inflation, which is crazy, there's a lot that can limit your financial freedom. So I've wanted to gain financial freedom. Yahoo Finance, you can get the access to the news, data, and tools that you need in order to help reach that financial freedom. Now, for more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. And so I'm not super seasoned as an investor, but whether you're a seasoned investor or just looking for extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. Plus, their community is great. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. Number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. We're back, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher talking with you on this weekend bonus edition of the show. Really appreciate everybody for all the support here on Locked On Ravens. Be sure to subscribe and follow along video form and audio form. And the way that we've been doing this over the past 5 years, the show has certainly evolved in many different ways. Did audio for the first couple of years, then we moved into video and audio form. We've added subtext to the equation, which has been great. Social media has been amazing as well. So however and wherever you're supporting me, it does not go unnoticed. I really appreciate it. And we're going strong, almost 5 years of hosting this show on Locked On Ravens. So thank you for everything. And we're going to keep going. So we're going to hopefully watch an exciting Ravens season, hopefully a Super Bowl season, and we're going to be covering it all here on Locked On Ravens. But before we get to the start of the year, we obviously have to see how the rest of the roster shakes out. So let's do a quick roster check-in in terms of where Baltimore is right now. Now, the quarterback position, there's not necessarily a ton to talk about here. Lamar Jackson is your guy, and that's really all I have to say about that. Josh Johnson is going to be the backup unless something crazy happens. And then it looks like Devin Leary going to be the number 3 with Malik Cunningham now out of the equation there. Running back is an interesting one, though, because Derrick Henry, we know he's going to be the bell cow, the new shiny addition to the Baltimore offense. But I think the question in that group is, when is Keaton Mitchell going to come back? Because he tore the ACL back in, what was it, week 15, week 14 against Jacksonville. Can't remember the exact week, but it was late in the season. And while ACL recoveries and ACL injuries, it's been a lot better in terms of the recovery rates and the recovery times. John Harbaugh gives the update, probably not going to be ready for week 1, right? So you have to take it with a grain of salt. He probably comes back mid-season, so that means an increased role for Justice Hill. Ricky Rasheen Ali is probably going to have a bigger role, so that one is very interesting. Now, Patrick Ricard is the fullback. I mean, Project Patty, we're questioning his role last year, but he earned everything. I mean, he's one of the better fullbacks in this league. Still a bit of a dying position, but when you talk about the fullbacks in this league, Patrick Ricard, I think, is one of the first, if not the first, that comes up. Wide receivers, you got Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Nelson Aguilar, Tylan Wallace, Devontae Walker, Deontay Hardy. You got a couple undrafted guys. Kadir Ismail, Kadri Ismail's son was just signed, 6'6" guy. So, again, I think they keep 6 wideouts. Those top 6 I mentioned are probably going to be them unless, an undrafted guy like Kadir takes the reins and earns a spot. But we're going to see. Wide receivers, it's a bold move to go young, especially at the number 2 position with Rashad Bateman. That extension was big for Baltimore in terms of the money, but it still is a risk because while Bateman is uber talented, and I'm still a Bateman believer, he's going to have to step up, and the chemistry just hasn't been there with Lamar. Tight end is probably Baltimore's best position, if we're being honest, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kohler. They have a couple of undrafted guys, but I really only expect them to keep 3, especially with how Patrick Ricard can kind of play in that role in line a little bit as well and be a threat there. So we know Andrews is the man. Mandrews, we know that. Isaiah Likely, I expect to have a much bigger role out of the gate, especially in 2 tight end sets and getting both Andrews and Likely on the field together. And then Charlie Kolar, he could have an increased role this season, but again, as long as Andrews and Likely are healthy, he's probably not seeing the field a ton. On the offensive line, your projected starting group for Baltimore right now is Ronnie Stanley, Andrew Voorhees, Tyler Linderbaum, Ben Cleveland, and Roger Rosengarten from left to right. You also have depth pieces like Saleh, Josh Jones, Daniel Falele, Patrick McCary, obviously. So that's already 9 right there. That's probably who I'd expect them to keep. Maybe they would only keep 8 and cut a guy like Saleh. I'm not necessarily sure. But replacing 3 starters on the offensive line is not an easy task. There's probably going to be some level of early season struggles in terms of just getting guys acclimated with each other and getting everybody meshed up. But by the end of the year, if everybody stays healthy and the consistency and continuity stays, I'm sure it will be fine. But there's a lot more youth on that line than in the past couple of seasons, which it can be both a good and a bad thing, which is interesting. Now, the defensive line to me is probably my favorite position, especially over the last couple of years on this team. You have obviously the big guys, Michael Pierce in there, and also Brent Urban as vets, but then you have the younger pieces. Justin Madubuike, who had the breakout season, 13-plus sacks. He's going to be the focal point of that line. I expect Travis Jones to have a massive breakout year this season, and then Broderick Washington, a bit of a disappointing year after signing that extension, but hopefully he can put up a bit more production this year. At the edge position, this one's interesting because you're relying on a bunch of young guys to step up. Odafe Owe has been decently solid for the Ravens right over his first 3 years, but I think a lot of people are expecting that big leap to come this season. And he essentially is Baltimore's number 1 outside linebacker now, unless you want to pin that on Kyle Van Noy, and wouldn't blame me if you did. Steady veteran, 9+ sacks last year. He's a guy that earned that extension that he got from Baltimore, and he's going to be a focal point. So I know there's going to be probably some conversations this year about who actually is a number 1. But then you have David Ojabo, who's been effective when he's healthy, but hasn't really been healthy over his first 2 years. Tavius Robinson had a huge role, and I expect him to have an even bigger one. Adisa Isaac, I'm not expecting a ton from him, but we'll see if they add anybody else there. I don't think they will. I think it's already going to be tight about who they keep. I don't project Malik Campbell on the roster right now, which would be tough for them, but we're going to see how that works out. Now, inside linebacker is another one because Roquan Smith is Roquan Smith. You don't need any introduction there. But with Patrick Queen gone, Trenton Simpson is going to be your man. But then you have Malik Harrison and Chris Board and Josh Ross. So it might be more of a tandem early on, I'd project. And then maybe Trenton Simpson pulls away as the season, gets really into the flow of things. And that's probably the projection I expect there. But we're going to see, because replacing Patrick Queen, I think a lot of people are confident in Trenton Simpson, including myself, but we're going to have to see it in full action. Week 18 last year, though, gave us a pretty nice glimpse into what Trenton Simpson can be, though. In the cornerback room, they lose Ronald Darby, they lose Rock Ya-Sin, but they replace those 2 guys with Nate Wiggins and also TJ Tampa. So Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Stevens, Nate Wiggins, TJ Tampa effectively are your top 4 there on the outside. Arthur Millette is going to be manning the slot for them. They also have guys like Ardarius Washington, Pepe Williams, Jalen Armour-Davis. So they are actually very deep at cornerback, but we all know how fickle that position can be and how it just can get decimated with injuries. So looks good now, but for Baltimore, they're going to have to continue to at least monitor some depth there. Safety, we've talked about throughout the course of this show. It's Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams right now, and not a lot else. Sanusi Kane, Bo Braid are really your other 2. You can also, secondary is so interchangeable these days where it's like not a huge deal, but if you had other guys who can move up and play safety, but they don't have a lot of those guys. You're not going to put Brandon Stevens back in that situation. Marlon, I'm not sure you do that either. You need somebody. That's the position that I am circling right now for Baltimore. So special teams, Justin Tucker, Jordan Stout, Nick Moore, not blinking an eye there. That's the squad. So I think Baltimore is in a fine position roster-wise. I don't think they're done roster-wise. I still expect a couple of vet moves here and there before the season starts. Maybe unexpected ones, maybe expected ones, but this is still a very talented roster, even though they did lose a ton in the offseason. So they're going to be one of the top teams in the AFC again. I'm projecting that, and we're going to see how the roster shapes up over these next couple of months. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens, this bonus episode. Thank you so much again for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, follow along video form and audio form. Coming up tomorrow, back to regularly scheduled programming, so stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow with another episode of Locked On Ravens.